Right, we are now being recorded, so everything we'll say. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yes, that's all good.
Right, so welcome everyone to the November edition of the WVD User Group, UK WVD User Group. This is obviously bonfire night, so I was a bit panicky about whether we'd get attendance tonight, but then I read that they'd cancelled most of the big bonfire events, so thank you for those who are attending. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Right, so agenda. So tonight we've got myself and Kirk, who are going to give a quick introduction to who we are. Then I'm going to do my usual monthly news update where we'll go over the latest WVD news. Then we've got Bas van Kaam here from Nerdio. He's going to give us some cool demos and tell us about Nerdio and the community edition and some other good stuff. Then a bit later we've got Esther Barthel joining, so she's going to tell you about some WVD Automation and DevOps stuff. She's doing a presentation with Control Up at the moment, so she might be slightly late. And then we've got a cool Kahoot quiz for you. So we're going to be asking questions based on tonight's content, so listen carefully. I don't think we've got any prizes for you, but we're trying to sort that out in the future. So that may be coming in the next month's user group presentation. So give you a bit of background between me. So over 20 years in IT, feel very, very old. We've actually got Gaz Davies here today. He used to work with me many, many years ago. I think me and Gaz have worked together for what, 20 years, Gaz?
Yep, not far off, Neil. And
yeah.
I have to say, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, so I currently work for a company called New Signature. I'm a senior Citrix and WVD architect. Been doing Citrix virtualization and VDI stuff probably for around 10 years now. That's been my focus. And the last 12 months have been pretty much focused 100% on Windows Virtual Desktop and Azure. I'm the co-founder of the WVD community and also the co-founder of the UK WVD User Group. I'm a Citrix CTA and also a Microsoft MVP. And you can find me on Twitter at virtualmike, virtualmike.co.uk, which I haven't updated in a long time now because I've been so busy, and also wvdcommunity.com website as well. So over to you, Kirk.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks everyone, and good evening. And if you hear what sounds like popcorn, it's the plethora of fireworks that Scousers love to set off this time of year. So, if you don't know me, I'm a principal technologist over at a company called NetApp. So I specialize in Azure and building specifically data platforms to support solutions in Azure. So everything from your FSLogix profiles, anything that requires low latency, high I/O, that sort of thing. So that's where my area of expertise. You'll usually see me somewhere at Ignite, Insight, other conferences, Build, that sort of thing. And you'll also see me very active on YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn as well. So nice to meet everyone this evening.
Thank you. Do you like your fireworks I did for you in the background, Kirk?
They're brilliant.
Yeah, so I mean, some of you may have seen this before, but for those who haven't, just a bit of history of who we are, where we've come from, and how we've got here. So we set the WVD community back up in April, and it's sort of grown massively and still continues to do so. So now we've got 10 user groups worldwide. They continue to grow. We've got over 1,300 followers on Twitter. We continue to get quite a lot of traffic on our website. So we've 26,000 total page views now since we started back in April, which is quite good. We've got a Slack channel as well, which you'll find the details of later. So that's quite good if you've got questions about WVD or you want to got a problem that you're trying to fix, just jump in there, and there's always someone there to sort of help and jump in the last minute if you need some assistance. We've got a podcast as well, which we we're doing quite well on, but the last one we've actually missed an episode because we've been a bit busy, some personal issues. So yeah, so that we've got another one next week hopefully. But yeah, we've over 1,500 downloads for that one. And also we do our weekly WVD newsletter. So if you head over to wvdcommunity.com, you can find our newsletter there, which we publish every Sunday. And yeah, we've also got 13 podcast episode. And so WVD Community as a sort of a group worldwide, we've got myself, Stefan and Patrick. So Stefan and Patrick came on board quite early on, so they sort of help us to run everything and keep everything in line. I think they're both with us tonight as well, which is nice. So yeah, Stefan also runs the Dutch WVD User Group, and Patrick also runs the German one as well. So it's good to keep things going. Yeah, so they're all the ones we have worldwide now. So we've got UK, Holland, Germany, Belgium, Danish, Swedish, USA, Australia, also the Italian one as well, which I've missed out. So yeah, they're continuing to grow. So it'd be good to have even more on there, maybe one in every country in the world, who knows. So yeah, what can you expect from these meetings? So we meet once a month. Because WVD changes so fast, right? I think once a quarter will be too much information, so we'd like to keep it once a month. Is that sweet spot between good content and what people want, basically. So we present the latest WVD news and hot topics. Obviously using Teams, as you know, who's using it right now, and we record the events, so everything will be recorded and made available and published onto our YouTube site afterwards. We were hoping to do a physical event in Q1 2021. That seems to be disappearing by the day. But yeah, maybe Q2 now. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how the next few months goes. So this is a community event. If you've got anything that you want to share, or if anything you want to talk about, just get in touch with myself or Kirk, and we can arrange if you want to come on and talk about deployment you've done or some troubleshooting. Even if you want to do a session that's only 5-10 minutes, that's fine. Let us know and we'll accommodate you as much as you can, because this whole thing has come about from community sharing. So we want to continue that and give back. So yeah, if you have something you want to share which you can think will help people, please do so, because you may not think it's important, but that person will. As I mentioned earlier, we've got a Slack channel. So if you want to sign up for that, that's the link. So you can automatically get signed up for that. And yes, jump in there. And there's Microsoft Global Black Belts in there as well to help out. And we've also got a feature request where if you've got a feature request that you want in WVD, you put it in there. And then Microsoft will try and look at that for you and see if it's worthy. And if they will get it added. Contact details, so that's our website, which you probably know about, the Twitter address, and also my contact details and Kirk's contact details. And that's it, that's us. The only thing I'll add about that is obviously we like to do Q&A as much as we can, so if you've got anything that you want to know about, or if you've got any questions around WVD, please just shout out and we'll try to answer your questions and help you as much as we can. Right, so I'm just going to unshare that, and I'm going to open up the presentation that I have for the news. Okay. Has anybody got any questions or anything before I head into the news? Nope. Okay. Right. Screen. Let me just check this the right one. Window. And Teams has been funny with me again. Just give me 1 second.
The other day, it wasn't showing the windows to actually share.
No, it lets. Yeah, the screen share is really funny with Teams. It just randomly doesn't work. Right, let me try again. Share options. Share. No, it's not working. Teams. Why do you always have to be the bane of my life?
Do you want to email it across to me and I'll see if I can share it?
Yeah, if you could do, mate, that would be much appreciated. I'm going to try one more time.
No worries.
No, just won't do it. Right, it's coming over to you now. Let me just do it. Sorry about this, folks. New email, Kirk.
What's the
NetApp address, right?
Yeah, that'd be great. Cheers.
Oops. 1 second. User Group November news. Right.
Just waiting for Outlook to the magic of the internet to send it down the wire.
Yeah, because I had this exact issue with when I was doing a custom presentation yesterday. And if you share, unshare, then try and share again,
brings it back. Yeah, I've
just
had it
won't do
sometimes
it.
when it locks out. Let's see.
I'll just sit. So, any date when MSA is coming to the portal? I've been, well, if you look at the roadmap, it says November. So hopefully it should be the end of this month, but I've not heard anything. They've been very quiet about it. So yeah, hopefully this month. Sometimes we do get the Microsoft guys jumping in on these presentations. So if I see one of them join, I'll ask him again for you, Tim. But yeah, as far as I know, end of November, that's when it's coming in the portal. Have you got that, Kirk?
Not yet, hasn't arrived yet.
Let's probably go through the mouse scanning. Right, let me see if I can get this working while. Sorry about this, folks.
Remember in the old days when you used to have to build Exchange servers? Okay, it's here. I'm just downloading it now. Open. Share. All right. Okay. So that's there. And let's share that.
Hey.
There we go. All right, and then let's just swap it over. Okay, you see it okay?
Yep.
Or is it good? So what's new this month? Right, so just tell me when to go forward and backwards.
Okay. So yeah, obviously this is the what's new slide. So again, I'd like to put pretty pictures of bonfires on just in case you feel that you're missing out on all the bonfires. So yeah, nice pretty bonfire. Next slide, please. Kirk.
There you go. Is it updated or not?
Nope.
Oh wow. We'll just go back to Teams. Teams stopped sharing the actual screen. Lovely. Share again.
This is why I should never use Teams, folks.
Let's try again.
They said doing the same thing with you.
Yeah, it's gone a little bit weird. All right.
Hey. Yep. There you go. Yeah. So first bit of news. WVD is 1 year old. It's quite crazy to think how far we've gone. It only seems, well, I remember when it's very first released, obviously it was all PowerShell based and a bit tricky to get up and running, and you have to have a 30-page document to create your first host pool and stuff. But yeah, it's 1 year old, and when you sort of think back how it was a year ago to how it is today, it's quite amazing. So I'm very excited to see where it's going to be in another year's time, or even a month's time, or 3 months time. Who knows? So yeah, happy birthday, WVD. Next slide, please, Kirk. The second bit of news we've got is the TechFest announcement. I'm not sure if you've seen it, so I pushed this out on social media earlier this week. So it's an event which has been arranged by Patrick Kohler and Simon Binder. So it's going to be at least a full days. I presume they're going to have multiple tracks and stuff. I don't know. But yeah, it's lots and lots of content around WVD. So that's on the 25th of February 2021. So if you head over to wvdtechfest.com, they're all doing a call for speakers as well. So if you want to do any presentations, get in touch with those guys and they'll be able to help you out. As you can see, lots of speakers. So we've got Bas, who's here, obviously Thomas Popicard, Esther, Jim Moyle from Microsoft, Dean, Christian Brinkhoff, Ryan Mangan, Freak Person. There's loads of people. So definitely worth signing up for one and keep an eye on that. Next slide, please. And there's also a Microsoft event which is being hosted next month in 4 weeks' time, where it's basically they're discussing about, again, what is 1 year old type of celebration event. So there's going to be sort of introductions, WVD overview, and then there's going to be a partner roundtable. So myself and Kirk are going to be on that roundtable as well. So we're going to be discussing WVD customer adoptions and stuff like that. And there's a few sessions around high availability, design security, so lots of stuff. So if you want to get to know WVD a bit more, certainly sign up for that event. Next slide, please, Kirk. And we've also got a new book as well. So Ryan Mangan's put a lot of effort into writing this book for Microsoft. So you can have a look on his blog and download it. It's free, you don't have to pay for it. So if you want to get started with WVD, or even if you know WVD, there's certainly something there that you can learn. So yeah, I know Ryan put a lot of effort into that. So thank you, Ryan, for the community contribution. And yeah, definitely give that some bedtime reading. Terraform. So it used to be the case that you could only do Terraform on the classic version of WVD. It now supports the full version, the newer version of WVD. So if you use Terraform in your environment, then definitely have a look at that, because it's when you look at what it's doing and how simple it is, you definitely want to use it. It's good if you're an existing Terraform customer and you want to continue to use it. It's definitely worth checking out. So there's some good blog posts on there. So Dean Lawrence has wrote a really good post on it, and also Jen Shireen. So if you want to get started on that, check out those posts and have a play about with it. Azure Advisor now supports WVD. So within your environment, you can now get tips on WVD by Azure Advisor. So if you've got any configuration, misconfiguration stuff in there, or any best practice stuff, Azure Advisor will pick it up for you. I don't know exactly what stuff it looks at. I think at the moment it's quite basic stuff, but I'm sure as time goes on, it'll start looking at more and more stuff in your WVD environment. So it's worth knowing about. Next, please, Kirk. WVD admin tools. So if you don't know about WVD admin, you need to. So WVD admin is a tool that you can download. I just realised I forgot to put a link on there. So it's a tool you can download. It's written by Marcel Mura. It's completely free. You don't have to pay for it, and it's an awesome tool. So he basically updates it. At the moment, it seems to be pretty much once a week. He's added lots of functionality. So The last few updates he's done have been pretty great. So he's added support for availability zones when you creating VMs. He's now put a thing in there where you can run scripts on multiple ARM hosts at the same time. So if you've got a configuration error and you want to update all your hosts without having to update the image, that's a really good way of doing it. He's also put a Windows update thing in there as well. So again, if you want to run your Windows updates on a scheduled basis, or you want to do any ad hoc basis, you can do that directly from this tool. So really, really good stuff from ourselves. But I say, if you haven't used it, check it out, because it's definitely a really good tool to have in your environment. Another mention for good old Ryan. So Ryan did a really great post, and he's been doing a lot of reverse engineering of SimFS. Not people know about it. It's hidden in the documentation. Sort of Ryan's picked up on it. So if you have a look at it, have a look at the blog post. So SimFS is the new sort of file system which Microsoft have produced for the MSI architects. It's a lot faster. It's a lot better on memory and processor. So Ryan's actually written a tool for it as well, so you can have a play about with it. So definitely have a look at that. It's worth knowing, especially if you're going to be doing a lot of deployments with MSX Appetite, which when it's released soon, that's going to blow up out the window, especially when it gets released to the portal. Because personally, I think it's just going to completely change the way that we do deployments. So good job there, Ryan. Next slide, please. Azure premium files tier. Kirk's not going to like this one, I'm afraid. So obviously, when you do Azure file, or when you do FSLogix deployments, you can pick either Azure files or a file server or NetApp files. So Microsoft have actually reduced the price of the premium tier down by 33%. So it used to be about double the cost of a normal. So premium basically gives you burstable IOPS. So yeah, it's definitely worth looking at. So if you're a bit and ahhing between premium and normal, I think they've just made that decision even easier for you now. So good shot by Microsoft. Next slide, please, Kirk.
Yeah, it's good. Brings it in line with other hyperscalers.
Yeah, definitely. One worth knowing about is Microsoft have published some recommended advice around BCP/DR. A lot of people don't realize, or most people expect, that when you deploy WVD, it's highly available by default. That's not the case. The service may be, but your VMs underneath it aren't. So if you need high availability within your environment, and then please have a read of this. And if you're doing any deployments, I'd suggest that you follow the sort of guidelines in this document, because even though you think because you're deploying WVD, it's not highly available, the service is, but your VMs underneath it and your file storage underneath it isn't. So definitely want to bookmark and keep in mind every time that you do a new implementation, or go back and revisit your existing implementation. Next slide, please, Kirk. We've also got a updated FSLogix agent that's in public preview. So I presume most of you use FSLogix in your environment. So definitely take a look at that one. So it's in public preview. There's a lot of fixes in it and a couple of changes. So have a look at the release notes and test it as well before you put it out there. So I just thought I'd let you know about that one. And also, we've got a new Udemy course. So Travis Roberts has produced a course for WVD. I believe that's the very first one that I've seen on Udemy. So if you're looking, again, if you're looking for an introduction, or if you're a seasoned WVD person, then there's definitely something on there for you. So it gives you a complete overhaul of WVD. So definitely worth signing up for that course. Even if you think you know something, you're going to learn something in there, because it covers a lot of stuff. So, and we've got a bit of news for Nerdio, and Travis has just mentioned that he's going to post a discount for his course for you guys. So thank you, Travis. So we've got a new version of Nerdio release. So Bas will be telling you about this shortly, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but Nerdio now have a community edition. So if you want to have a play about with Nerdio in your lab before deploying it into a production environment, you can now do so. It's limited to 25 users, I believe, and it has all the additions that the full feature give you. So definitely worth checking out, but we'll explain shortly. Next slide, please. Yep, and also we've got Nerdio Manager 2.50 release. Again, Nerdio are doing amazing work by keeping stuff updated. So they're doing, it used to be updates every 2 weeks, but now I think they've gone to a monthly update cycle. So lots of nice new features in there. So we've got migration, automatic updates, again, availability zones, lots of stuff. So check out the link in there, and I'll post all these links afterwards as well, and we could put them in the chat window later as well. So again, Bas may tell you about all that stuff later. And that's it. That's the news for this month. I say quite a bit, so I'm always amazed how much things change with WVD. It seems to be constantly evolving platform, getting better and better and better all the time. So I like your background, Kirk. It's
always more appropriate, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've already got the sound effects in the background to complement it.
Awesome. Awesome. Right. Do we have any questions before we move on to the next? So Travis has just put a discount code in there. So if you guys are interested in these Udemy course, then have a look at that and get it at a discounted cost. So thanks for that, Travis. Okay, any questions on anything with that content before we hand over to Bas? Nope. Okay, Bas, all yours.
Let's get started. Okay, thanks, man. Let me start sharing my screen. Can you hear me okay? Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, Neil, Kirk, thank you very much for the invite to be on the show tonight, and well, letting me spread some of the Nerdio magic, as you mentioned before. And thanks for mentioning Nerdio, by the way, on your slides as well. And of course, I'm going to talk about the community edition in a bit more detail throughout the presentation, which brings me to the agenda. And of course, good evening to everyone joining the session as well, before I forget. So I'd like to start out with a short intro, just a couple of minutes, talk a bit about myself, so you guys sort of know who I am, what I like to spend my time on, together with my kids and so on. Talk a bit about the company Nerdio as well, how we started and where we are today. And of course, most of my time I would like to spend doing demos, so showing you a couple of things around Manager for WVD. Pay attention, because everything I'm going to show you this evening as part of the demo will be part or is part of Nerdio Manager for WVD, the community edition as well. So that's good to know before we get started. Of course, I'd like to introduce you to the auto scaling engine that we've built in for multiple use cases, image management, a couple of overall management tasks, if you will. MSIX app attach, because we already have that built into the product as part of the 2.5.0 release that Neil mentioned as well. Manager for WVD Community Edition, how to get it, where to get it, what some of the limitations are. Not that many, I promise you, which I will save near the end of the presentation. Of course, all the time for questions that you want, because I'll stay around for at least 50 minutes or so after the presentation as well. All right, so my name is Bas van Kaam. I live in the Netherlands, based in the Netherlands as well, in a small town called De Velzenbroek. It's about 20 minutes by car from Amsterdam, so close to that. I'm engaged to Tineke. We have been for a couple of years already, so you know, people start to ask questions. When's the party? When's the marriage? And so on and so forth. We decided to get married somewhere next year, which we only decided a couple of weeks ago, and we'll just see what happens with the party. Perhaps we'll do it 6 months later, a year later. Who cares? You know, it's not the situation isn't there to throw a big party now. So we'll just wait for that. I'm a father of 3 kids, Julia, Sophie, and Max. Max is turning 23 months, so it's pretty fun to have that little guy around. I'm involved with various community activities, projects as well. Together with Stefan and Esther and Niels Kok as well, we run the Dutch Windows Virtual Desktop User Group, and we have an event coming up on December the 9th, next week. It will be in Dutch, so if you are Dutch and haven't RSVP'd already, please do. We have a meetup page as well, of course. Been involved with writing a couple of books, hundreds of blog posts. I think the counter is around 450 or so. Done a lot of presentations, exclusively online nowadays, of course, with a couple of exceptions here and there, because in the Netherlands that was still possible throughout the last couple of months. Involved with a podcast as well, EUC Digest. So if you haven't heard of it before, go check it out. Love to spend time with my kids. Blogging and writing is a hobby as well. Love to go out for a run multiple times per week. So let's meet up on Strava also, as for my other socials. You know where to find me, hopefully. All right. So a bit about Nerdio, just 1 or 2 minutes. The company was founded back in 2016 by Vadim Vladimirsky, who is still our current CEO. And almost 2 years ago, or 2 years ago to the day, or just a couple of days ago, I think it was a couple of days ago, which was his 2 years anniversary at the company, Joseph Landis joined. So 2 years ago, after spending almost 25 years at Microsoft. And together they run the company today. In 2017, as you can see on the slide as well, we started out with our private cloud solution, which was hosted in-house as well. But shortly after that, our first in-house developed product was launched, Nerdio for Azure. Nerdio for Azure is aimed specifically at the MSP market. So as you'll find out shortly, it's a bit different from a distribution point of view when you compare it to Manager for WVD as well. And when Nerdio for Azure was launched, that was about the same time that WVD became available in private preview as well. Not long after, when WVD went GA, I think that's now 10, 12 months ago, or 9 or 10 months ago, 10, 11 months, Nerdio for Azure had already built in various management capabilities around WVD as of day one, as you can see on the slide. And what happened was various other, let's say, non-MSP companies saw that, and they started asking, well, do you have something similar for us like that as well? And that's basically how the idea started around Manager for WVD. Developments started in late 2019. The private preview was at the beginning of this year in January, public preview at the beginning of March this year as well. And we now sort of silently went to GA, and we have a couple of hundred paying customers globally already. It's going really, really well. All right, Manager for WVD is what I'm going to talk about, or most of all, show you tonight. And this is basically the only marketing slide, if that's the right term for it, that I have to share with you tonight. And after this, it will be, well, tech only, basically. So ease of management, that's a big part of what Manager for WVD offers, on top of the native WVD platform, of course. So above 80% or more of your IT workforce will be able to leverage WVD on a daily basis, to build it, to manage it, deploy it, operate it, and most of all, optimize it. Because we try to make working with WVD as easy as it possibly can be, to hide all of the complexity. Is what I was about to say. Almost everything you do within the solution is fully automated, so no PowerShell or scripting or anything like that, no ARM templates, JSON language, or deep Azure knowledge is needed to work with the product on a daily basis. Takes care of the feature gap, which is an important one as well, of course, which is something we'll continue to do going forward, month after month, year after year. So reducing costs is all about, well, two things actually. So for one, we add in a lot of efficiency with regards to managing and working with WVD, which means you will save time per person per week, which also results in cost savings, of course. That's just how it works. But next to that, we also have a very powerful auto-scaling engine built in, and you'll reduce up to 75% of your costs on your underlying Azure Compute and storage resources. And that's something I will be able to show you within the solution as well. Let me get rid of this guy here. Just 1 second. So security, also an important story to tell. If you look at the way that the solution is architected, the way we build it, design it, and also how it is deployed, so meaning within the customer's own tenant, so that means nobody else has access together with the IT partner, or except for the IT partner, for example. You decide who has access, if that is at all necessary, of course. No third party has access. Nerdio does not have access. So from a security point of view, you have full control. And I think that's a good thing to know and a good story to be able to tell as well. So that brings me to the deployment architecture. Like I mentioned, it's deployed in the customer's own tenant, meaning it's a standalone Azure application. It's not multi-tenant. It's not a hosted shared management plane of some sort or VMs that we manage for you. No, not at all. 100% Azure native technology, as I'll show you on the next slide as well. It's available in all regions worldwide because it's deployed and built through the Azure Marketplace. And this, by the way, applies to the Manager for WVD Community Edition as well. So from a high level perspective, as you can see here as well, you have the Azure Marketplace. It gets deployed. Nerdio Manager for WVD gets deployed in a tenant. And here you see a couple of the platform as a service services that get deployed, or I should say that Nerdio Manager for WVD is built out of. So native Azure technology exclusively, which is important to know. And this is something I'll highlight near the end of the presentation when we talk a bit more about the community edition as well. A couple of tips and tricks to keep this as, you know, as cheap as it possibly can be. But also from a development perspective, it's not just very powerful when it comes to the auto scaling, image management, and all that kind of stuff. It's also very flexible from a development perspective. And that's why, and I think Neil mentioned this as well, we come out with at least one new release of our software every month. And if you look back for the last 6 or 7 months, I think the average has been 2 releases every month. So that's pretty impressive and a lot of fun to work for a company like that that's so innovative as well. I always have lots of news to share, you could say. So let's do a demo. Let me see over here. All right, this is the graphical user interface of Manager for WVD, which you'll get into after the installation finishes. And by the way, if you go to the Azure Marketplace, you search for Nerdio, you select Nerdio Manager for WVD, select your subscription, fill in a couple of fields, and that's basically it. All you have to do is wait for, let's say, 35 minutes or something like that, depending on the region you are deploying it into, how busy that region is, and so on and so forth. But most of it is automated as well. Anyway, after answering a couple of questions like what's your default Active Directory you would like to connect to, a resource group, a network, and so on and so forth, a couple of basic stuff, you'll end up in the graphical user interface that I'm showing you now. But of course, this will all be empty to start out with. But let's say you already have an existing WVD environment, which can be a tenant or a workspace, because you can see we can manage both from the same management interface. So let's say you have a couple of tenant host pools already up and running. Basically, all you need to do is go into settings. And when we talk about settings, by the way, see this as sort of the default configuration, which can easily be changed, of course, as you'll see in just a couple of seconds. But also the default configuration that Manager for WVD is built on top of. But a lot of that can be changed on a per host pool basis. And hopefully I will be able to show you that later on in the presentation as well. But let's start here as your environment. So here you can see your tenants, your subscriptions, and as you will notice, you can have multiple tenants, but you will always have one primary tenant which is responsible for identity. So one Azure Active Directory, if you will. You are allowed to, it is possible to add in multiple Azure subscriptions per tenant, as you can see here, which is pretty much limitless, if you will. Now, with regards to any existing WVD environments, when I started out talking about this page. If you have any and you link the network and the resource group that they are deployed into, so where your hosts are deployed into, you then hop over to tenants, do a page refresh, and you'll then see them pop up here. Then all you have to do is associate the underlying VMs and the tenant itself as well with Manager for WVD, which will take a couple of minutes, and then you will be able to manage those environments with Manager for WVD as well. So then everything I'm going to show you after this will apply to those environments also. And of course, that also applies to workspaces that you might already have. Now, tenants is something I see on a daily basis still, which is not strange, of course, because it has been in private preview like that for quite a while. Good to know that you are also able to migrate over your tenants over to workspaces. We cut it up into 2 steps, basically. So see the first step as your the metadata as part of your existing tenant, if you will, together with the migrations of your VMs. And these can be done at the same time, or you can do them separately as well, as you can see. So select the host pool you would like to migrate, change the new host pool name if that's something you would like to do, and of course select the destination as well. If you have multiple, select them from here and choose what you would like to do with your user assignments here. Now you click migrate. This will just take a couple of seconds because it's just sort of an empty container that it needs to copy over, and that's it. Of course, the migrating of your VMs will take a bit longer, but here you can also tell the system how many hosts as part of your host pool it is allowed to migrate at the same time. So let's say 5 or 10 or whatever you would like to do, and how many things are allowed to fail before this whole process will be aborted. And of course, this can all be scheduled at will as well. Keep an eye on your time zone, of course. Now, if there are still active sessions on one or multiple of those hosts that are being migrated, your users will be notified with a delay built in as well, of course. So first, they will see the notification, and then 10, 15, 30 minutes, and so on and so forth, depending on what you configure here. After that, the machines will be migrated over. So click migrate, and if you've scheduled it, it will just go to sleep and wake up at the proper hour. So good to know that that's built in as well. Now, another point, which is part of settings, by the way, is workspaces and tenants. As you can see, and I just showed you part of that as well, we can manage both from the same management interface. And that's something you'll find under the Nerdio environment. So here you can choose to do hybrid, which means both, or just one or the other. Click the link, wait a couple of minutes, and you'll be good to go. And you can just do this, while everybody's working and so on and so forth. Not an issue at all. Then we have integrations, multiple actually, and this is also part of a lot of automation that's built into the product. So various native other Azure services like profile storage or the profile storage containers from WVD, for example, but also Azure files, Azure NetApp files. There's a Paco monitoring solution, of course, which is integrated, but also App-attached storage, which I'll come back to later because I'd like to mention App-attached separately as well. These are all built in, and with that I mean if you click Add, walk through the wizard, fill in the fields, select the drop-down menus, click Add, and then the configuration and everything that needs to be set up and so on and so forth will be taken care of for you, automated underneath on the underlying Azure platform as well. And depending on what you have configured here, together with, for example, the WVD agent, you have multiple options to, for example, when you add in an image, to delete those, and then when you add in new hosts or start to provision a new host pool, everything that's needed from a client perspective will be installed and configured like you want to have it or have configured here also. So when you update your hosts within your host pools or create a new host pool with hosts in it, all that will be done automated. Including all of the settings you can set for WVD, for example, including the storage location. But again, this is all part of the default configuration of Manager for WVD as part of the settings pane here. And this can all be changed and everything else you see here as well on a per host pool level. But we'll get to that in just a few minutes. So let's hop over to workspaces. I want to show you a couple of things around auto scaling, of course. So first, let's add in a workspace just to show you how quick that goes. Give it a name. Just 1 second. I think I have it not disabled. Right. So just give it a name. It doesn't really matter what type of name. This is the friendly name is what your users will be able to see. So you might want to give that a bit more thought. Description for admin purposes, for example, for internal use only. And of course, you would need to select a resource group to deploy this workspace into together with an Azure region. Click OK, and this will just take a couple of seconds, as you'll see on the screen happening as well. And now we would be ready to add in one or multiple host pools. And as you can see here, we have dynamic and static to choose from, as you can saw on the left side as well when we started out. And the only difference between the two is that with static host pools, you will add in and remove hosts manually using this graphical user interface, of course. And with a dynamic host pool, which is something I'd like to show you, you can make use of the auto scaling engine in the background, taking care of most of all of the work for you. So again, give it a description, give it a name. It doesn't really matter for now. But here you need to choose the desktop experience which you would like to offer to your users. So meaning a host shared desktop environment, for example, published applications, a single user desktop, meaning non-persistent, or a personal persistent assigned desktop. And for this, we have a separate scaling engine as well. And I'll briefly show you that once we get done through this. So the name prefix, which is sort of an important one, this is used by the scaling engine when it adds in and removes machines to the host pool to give it a unique name. So first, it will, of course, use the name prefix that you fill in here. Then it will generate fully automated, of course, an alphanumeric string, and it will attach that, append that to the name prefix. So that way it makes sure that it will always have or that the host will always have a unique name. Now, the best thing is those names will also be reused. That is something you can turn off, as you'll see on the next screen in just a minute. But most of the customer leave it turned on, because that means that if a machine is added to the host pool, it will get a unique name. Then because of user demand, the machine is deleted after a couple of hours, or at night when autoscaling kicks in and machines are turned down for cost savings, for example. And then the next morning the machine is needed again. Once it is added, it will reuse the same name. So it will keep your AD clean and policy will still apply and certificates and you name it. So that's good to know as well. Select a network to connect to, of course, an image to apply to those virtual machines. But I'd like to get into this in a bit more detail once we get through the auto scaling part. This is sort of the second big thing I'd like to highlight as part of the demo or the presentation tonight. Select the VM size, and of course, these are all of the VMs. These are APIs in the background that you will find on the Azure platform as well. So for now, it doesn't really matter. And of course, the same applies to all of the various OS disks that go with the various VM sizes also. Select a resource group to add the dynamic host pool into, click OK. And this will just take a bit longer when compared to creating a workspace, as you'll notice as well. But also it's now, by the way, loading the configuration page. And as you can see, I didn't have to fill in how many machines I would like to have part of this host pool, because that's something we'll configure on the autoscale configuration page, as you can see here. All right, you need to turn it on. It's off by default. Makes sense, of course. Here you see the information we just filled in, and here's the part of reusing the host names, like I mentioned at the previous on the previous screen. So you can turn it off, but there's really no reason. It's just handy that it's there. Now you see a lot of fields that you can fill in, a lot of drop-down menus, and so on and so forth. And most of this has a direct impact on your monthly costs. That's why you see an estimate here with regards to your compute and storage costs, so a minimum and a maximum. And of course, the actual costs will be somewhere in between, because you never know how user demand will turn out per week, per month, and so on and so forth. Makes sense as well, I hope. All right, but well, first, by the way, look at the pricing. If I change it to 3, you see change it to 6, and so on and so forth. Let's put it back to 5. So that's how that would work. And of course, that also applies if I would select a more expensive GPU-enabled machine, for example. That also has a direct impact on mainly the compute costs. So how do we configure autoscaling? A couple of things to it. First of all, the host pool size. So here we can define the base host pool capacity, as we like to call it. And that means that in this particular example, but of course all of these fields can be freely filled in, we will always have 5 machines as part of this host pool. And below we tell it that one of those machines needs to be turned on at all times, for the user experience. If somebody logs in at night or in the weekends or anything like that, depending on how we have autoscaling configured, there will always be one machine running. And in this case, we assume it's a hosted shared environment, of course. So the user will have a smooth logging experience because machines do not have to be booted first. And then if user demand increases, it will start to fire up the other 4 machines as part of the base host pool capacity. Hope that makes sense as well. Now, if these 5 machines are still not enough, we can tell it to burst beyond the base capacity with 2 machines or 20 or 200 or 19, whatever you would like to fill in. So that means these machines will be booted and shut down, and these machines will be added on top of the 5. And once they are no longer needed, they will be completely removed, deleted, and then rebuild again once needed again. So that's how that works. That's the main difference between the base host pool capacity and the burst beyond base capacity. Hope that makes sense as well. Now, before this happens, there needs to be some scaling logic to base this on. So there needs to happen something needs to happen first before this will kick into action, of course. Which brings me to the scaling logic. So here we can work with CPU usage, average active sessions, available sessions, though CPU usage is what we see most in practice. And it works like this. So here we tell the autoscale engine to add in 1 machine, so scale out with 1 machine, if the CPU utilization across all hosts in the host pool exceeds 65% for 5 minutes or longer. And it will do the same thing with completely removing a machine or shutting down a machine if it drops below 40% for 50 minutes or 5, 30, or 60. Now, when you remove machines where multiple users are working on a hosted shared environment, in this particular case, it can be kind of tricky because you need to keep those other users in mind, or all the users in mind as well. So we have a couple of things built in to help you with that. So here you can say, for example, to the auto scaling engine, when it is allowed, and basically also not allowed, to scale in and stop machines, remove machines within a certain time window. So let's say from let's see, 6 p.m. in the afternoon until 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning. Between those times, the auto scaling engine is allowed to remove machines and to scale machines and stop machines and so on and so forth, depending again on your time zone. Always keep an eye on that. Now, this is really helpful, but it's not enough. So this is combined with what we call the scale-in aggressiveness. And I'll explain what I mean with that. And by the way, you see all of the icons after each configuration option, basically, and it will tell you exactly what it is that you are configuring or where you need to go to get some additional information with regards to what it is that you need to do, of course. But also, if you look at scale and aggressiveness, a good example also, it will tell you exactly what high is, it will tell you exactly what medium is, and so on and so forth. But I'll explain it now, of course, as well. Just so you know, if you start playing around with Community Edition, for example, this can be very helpful for you guys as well. So once it is set to high and scaling in is allowed as of 6 p.m. in the afternoon, beginning of the evening, what will happen is the machines will be put into drain mode. It will look for the empty machines first and shut those down and scale those in. And then it will look for machines with active sessions, and it will start with the machine with the least active sessions, and it will follow that route. Excuse me. Now, if it is to shut down, scale in a machine with still active sessions, you can use messaging as well. Tell your users that something is about to happen, and then 10 minutes or 15, 30, and so on and so forth. After that, the scaling in will actually, or the shutdown, whatever the case may be, will actually happen. Now with medium, it's the same thing, into drain mode, and then after that, it will look for machines with disconnected sessions only, shut those down, scale those in, remove those. And it will leave all of the machines with active sessions alone. And you probably have guessed it by now with load, the same thing, into drain mode, but it will only look for machines with no active sessions, and it will leave all of the rest of the machines alone. So all of the active sessions will be left alone. So this is how you can take care of sort of the fine line between, let's say, user experience and cost optimizations, at least for hosted shared environments. In between, we have pre-stage hosting. So that means, let's say from Monday to Friday, you would like to have a certain amount of machines started, booted, ready to go at a certain time. So that's how you take care of this, of that. And it will know how much time it would take to fire up those machines. So it won't start at 8 a.m. It will start like 7:45 or 7:50 or something like that, depending on the number you fill in here, of course, as well. We talked about messaging. So auto heal broken hosts. We've gotten some very nice feedback on this feature as well. So as you might know, or perhaps not, the WVD agent can give back various statuses. Excuse me. And of course, we'd like to focus on the negative ones in this particular case. You can add in as many as you would like. And then depending on what you have configured here, so basically if this is true, you can tell the system, the auto scaling engine, what it needs to do with that particular machine. So for example, you might want to give it a reboot a couple of times, so wait a couple of minutes, a certain amount of minutes, a number of minutes in between, but you can also tell it to remove it and recreate it or leave it as is. That's also an option, of course. Let me just take one sip of water, guys, in between. All right. So once you click save, because we are now still configuring a dynamic host pool, what would happen is, and let's make this 2, and I'll click save. So what should happen is it will now start to provision at least those 2 machines. As you can see here, it's pending already and now in progress. And one of those 2 machines will be in a booted state once it's ready with building this dynamic host pool. So let's perhaps we have time to get back to that later. Let me now hop over to a couple of existing host pools, and let's see if I can find a personal desktop so I can show you the auto scaling part on that as well. So as you can see, it looks a bit different. It works slightly different as well, but of course the end result will be exactly the same. Cost savings and help with the user experience, sort of the main topics of auto scaling, of course, or the main objects, I should say. Set your working hours again. So from, let's say, Monday till Friday. So here you can see the times are reversed, basically. So here you set the start date. Let's take 6 p.m. again. And now let's have a look at some of the other options, because it is a bit different. Power of aggressiveness is sort of the same thing as scale in aggressiveness. And as you can see here, we have high, medium, and low again, and it means the same thing. Of course, brain mode with personal assigned desktops, persistent desktops isn't needed. That's only for hosted shared environments. But here, if you set it to high, the system, the engine, is also allowed to shut down machines with an active session on it, which is fine after working hours, of course, in some cases perhaps, but it's something you need to think about. And if you set this to medium, it's not allowed to shut down machines with an active session, but only with no sessions, inactive sessions, or disconnected sessions, for example. And this is important to keep an eye on because power of aggressiveness works in conjunction with power of timing. This can be set to continuously, so on and on and on and on again, once or never, but because of cost savings, primarily, you set it to continuously to make sure that no machines are running that should not be running after working hours, for example. However, like I mentioned, these two work in conjunction. So if you would set this to high, it would mean it is allowed to also shut down machines with an active session, and it will do so continuously. So that's probably not something you want to configure. But it's good to know that you have all these options to configure. Power on timing, sort of the same thing, once, never, or continuously as well. And of course, this applies at the start of the working day. This would be at 8 a.m. in the morning. So you can get very granular with all this. And of course, this all can be configured on a per host pool basis. And together with this, there's another thing I'd like to highlight as well. We have multiple users and roles built in, so role-based access, if you will. I'm not going to go over all the roles now, but just so you know, we have multiple built in, and there's a custom one coming up in the future as well, amongst with a lot of other cool stuff, of course. But here I would like to focus on the end user role. And by the way, we have a KB article which explains in just 1 minute what the various differences between these roles are. Very straightforward. So the end user role is a special one. If a user has a personal assigned persistent desktop and also the end user role within Manager for WVD, he or she will be able to log into Manager for WVD, and then he or she will also be able to start, stop, and restart their own personal machine. And if the user is also part of a hosted shared desktop session, or a hosted shared desktop host pool, with regards to the user experience, he would also or she would also be able to log off their own personal sessions from those hosts as well. So if you combine this together with the auto scaling, you can get very detailed, very granular, and there's basically not a use case you cannot handle. All right, that's it for the auto scaling part. If you go to workspaces, you can also see the cost savings on a workspace level. And if you go a level deeper, you can also see the cost savings because of the auto scaling that is applied on a per host pool basis as well. We also have reports, but I don't think there's much going on in the demo environment, but I'll show you it anyway. So you can look at history, for example, and select a custom date range or just the last week or whatever you like, and filter on this as well. And then it will show you what has happened at what time, what reason, well, an error in this particular case, but you would be able to see exactly what happened at what time, what date, what the reason was for a particular action, what some of the savings might have been, as you can see near the bottom, as a result of that action, and so on and so forth. And you would also have a breakdown of your savings. But again, this is a demo environment, not really used for production purposes, of course. So perhaps if I dig into another host, I can find something, but I think you get the general idea. Pretty useful, this as well. All right, let's hop over to images, image management. Now you have multiple ways you can import images into Manager for WVD. And again, this also all applies to the community edition, which I'll highlight in just a few minutes as well. Just know, besides having multiple options to import images, you do not per se have to import all of your images if you don't want to. If you have a custom Azure image, for example, or an image as part of the shared image gallery, those can also be used directly from within Manager for WVD without importing them to update an existing host pool or to create a new host pool and host, of course, in that host pool, which I'll show you once we get past this page also. First, let's assume you've imported one or multiple images, as you can see on the screen as well. Multiple things you can do. For one, you would be able to power it on, of course. Select if you would like to make a backup, save it for 1 or multiple weeks. And when the retention period expires, it will only throw away the backup, but it will leave the image alone. Now, if you've done that multiple times, you also have versioning. So you would click restore. And if for whatever reason a particular image doesn't work correctly or the way you expect it in test production, whatever the case may be, you can revert it back to an earlier version of that same image, for example. Also, of course, you can start a backup or a restore manually. Restore I just showed you. You can delete it, of course, but you can also clone it. This is handy if you work in multiple regions, for example. So select a network in a different region and it will clone over that particular image to that region for you as well. And again, that will be automated, of course. Now, once it is imported, once you have powered it on, it will look like this. You would be able to use the IP address, then RDP, for example, into your image. Make changes, install software, apply patches, security updates, you name it. You would then come back into Manager for WVD, select power off and set it as an image again. And then the whole sysprepping part will be taken care of, fully automated as well. That's with regards to part of the image management process within Manager for WVD. But how do we get images into Manager for WVD? Well, multiple options. For one, we could start with an existing Azure VM that you have been using for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, or perhaps you just build it, which is also optional, of course. Give it a name, a description, and basically all we need it to be is a managed disk. And then you would be able to copy and paste the SAS URL into here, and that's all we need. Select some of the other fields, which you just already saw as well when we created a new host pool. And of course, have a look at some of the other nifty gems we've built in here as well. Very handy to do this directly once you are ready to import your image. Click OK, and then it will take 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how large your image is, how busy Azure is, of course, depending on the region as well, and so on and so forth. So that's one option you have. If we go over to the Azure library, it gets even more interesting because we have multiple images, a couple of the same fields over here, of course, a bit less options here, but still good to have a look at. And then here you can choose to import the custom made images from Microsoft and then edit them afterwards, for example, easy to get started for Community Edition, for example. Or you may have custom images that you would like to import, so an Azure custom image. And again, if you, or not again, but if you would like to use an Azure custom image to update your or re-image an existing host pool, you won't have to reassign any users, you won't have to rebuild it, it will all be taken care of automated. So you don't have to worry about this or about that. And the shared image gallery, we directly integrate with that as well. So if you have any of these types of images, just select them, click OK, have a look at some of the other options, of course, and again, 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the region, the size, and so on and so forth. And of course, we already spoke about some of the management capabilities once those images are imported. But after that, you would like to go to an existing host pool, go to the management part. Let me see, to properties, oh, to host, sorry. This has changed just overnight. And then select resize reimage. And then here you would be able to select your desktop image of choice. So perhaps one you just updated, for example, just select it. Choose what you would like to do with VM size or OS disk at this time. And here you can tell the system how many hosts it should update as part of the, or at the same time as part of this resize and re-image process. And of course, how many things may or are allowed to fail, may fail before this whole process will be halted. Now, all this can be scheduled as well. Again, keep an eye on your time zone, select your time window, and of course the proper date, especially if you're working after 12, for example. And of course, you can repeat it. Well, I say, of course, but you can repeat this as well, daily, weekly, monthly, you name it. So that's very handy to have that built in here as well. Now, there may still be active sessions on those machines that get re-imaged. So again, we have the messaging part built in here as well, which works exactly the same way as with the auto scaling, the removing and shutting down of machines. So when this happens, it will leave the VM NIC, which is a separate resource, as you guys might know, within Azure as well. It will leave that alone. So your DNS won't change, IP address will stay the same, naming won't change, and so on and so forth. So you won't have to worry about that also, which I guess is good to know. Right. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the more basic stuff, but still very important to have built in as well. So for example, let's have a look at user sessions. I don't think there are any active sessions, no, but a disconnected one. Of course, you have multiple ways to filter, for example, on a per host pool basis, but a lot of other options as well. You can log off sessions, disconnected sessions as well. As you can see, send messages, shadow sessions, disconnect existing sessions, and so on and so forth. So pretty straightforward to get to and very handy to operate as well. And of course, combined with the various users and roles like help desk, for example, this is extremely handy to have. A couple of other things. Let's see, field apps is a good one, I think. So let's say manage users and groups. So when we talk about entitlements, so assigning users to your host pools, this is the way you would do that. Of course, on the settings, you would have your primary Active Directory connected. And here you can select all groups or, well, these are the app groups. So meaning if you have multiple application groups or desktop groups, and here you can just search for users, select them, assign them, unassign them. And that's as easy as it can be, is my guess. So a couple of other options as well. If you go to properties, these are a couple of the things I mentioned at the beginning, where you can diverge from the standard settings or the default settings you set on the settings page where I started out at the beginning of the presentation. So Active Directory, for example, you can say no, do custom. You can add in multiple Active Directories as I've shown you at the beginning under your Azure environments. And this is also the way you would use different Active Directories on a per host pool basis, or perhaps you would just like to use different organizational units on a per host pool basis. That's of course optional as well. Go to properties, WVD. This is the load balancing mechanism, which only applies to hosted shared environments, of course, not to personal assigned desktops. A couple of other things. Let's see. Oh, the VM deployment is a nice one as well. So a couple of things to notice. Again, the time zone and time zone redirection on a per host pool basis. This is all set to on by default because it only applies if it applies to, well, except for the availability zones, by the way. But if it applies to the specific VM that you are using, you will only benefit from that. So, for example, install the right GPU drivers if that's something you don't want to do yourself as part of managing your images, for example. And of course, accelerated networking is something like that as well. If it applies to the VM, you would like to use it. Availability zone. So we spoke a bit about high availability at the beginning. We can work with availability sets, which is configured on the settings page, but on a per host pool basis, you can also distribute your VMs to availability zones. And this is a very nice one to have built in as well for, again, for disaster recovery purposes, high availability purposes, and so on and so forth. This is the script from the VDI guys. You saw them come by just recently, I believe, as part of the cloud podcast from Christian, who, by the way, wrote something about this tool as well. And we have all the links built in, of course, when applicable also. A couple of other things. You can run post PowerShell scripts. So once the setup and the installation finishes, or as part of the installation, basically, you can run various PowerShell scripts and commands as well, if that's something you would like to do. So very detailed in that way also. A couple of other things. So tagging is just tagging. This is very simple, but very effective. So these apply to all of your RDP sessions, again, on a per host pool basis, all 37 of them. So these are the more advanced ones. Easy to get to, easy to configure and set as well, all built in from the same management interface. Tags, FS Logics, also a big one. Turn it off, turn it on a per host pool basis. Use the defaults, do not use the defaults. Use a different storage location, for example. Work with different parameters, and so on and so forth. Let me see what more. Sepago is the built-in Azure monitoring solution that we offer, enabled on the settings page as well. And pretty easy to configure. We have multiple videos within 5 to 10 minutes telling you what to do, how to do it, where to go, and so on and so forth. So you'll be up and running, let's say, within 10 to 15 minutes if that's something you would like to use. And then afterwards, you will be able to, in a very granular way, set up your own dashboards with all the information you would like to see. Session time limits, also a very nice one to have. So again, per host pool, select when log of sessions go into a disconnected state, for example. And you have all the same options with idle timing as well, you know, and more than that. So no GPOs, just do it from manager for WVD. All right. Let's hop over to integrations. Of course, I won't be able to show you everything, and I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on the community edition as well, how to get it, what some of the differences with the paid for version are, but focus a bit more on that also. So this is the last big thing, if you will. So if you would like to use app attach within Manager for WVD, it's sort of a 3-step, perhaps even 4-step process, very flexible in that way as well. First, you would need to link proper storage, and this needs to be an Azure file share. So pretty straightforward to do because that's something we have automated as well. And then it's easy to link it here. Once that's done, you go over to App Attach Apps. And then here you would be able to upload your MSIX App Attach package, work with certificates optionally. And that's basically all you need to do. Fill in the fields and do the upload and you're done. And we also offer multiple packages, parts, or a couple of those are shown here as well for you guys to test with. So these are downloadable from our website, for example. Once you've done that, you would go to assignments and then select the users or groups of users you would like to assign to those specific packages. And as a last step, you would go over to one of your host pools, and we have an App Attach demo here. Go to Manage, and then let's see App Attach Apps. And then here you would be able to enable App Attach to start out with on that particular host pool. So that's a per host pool setting also. And select the storage location. You might have more than one. And of course, the App Attach packages you would like to offer as part of that host pool. Now, like I mentioned, there's much more to tell. One of the other cool things is that we have very detailed auditing built in as well. So it will tell you exactly what has been done by whom, if it's automated or not, all of the steps in between. So let's see if I can find a more. No, well, I was looking for a machine to be added because you can then see exactly what happens at what time, what date, the installation of agents, the removement of extensions, and joining the domain, creating the VM, applying the image, and so on and so forth. Very interesting to have a look at, especially when things go wrong, of course, with regards to applying an image to a VM or something like that. All right, finally, updates. If there's a new update coming out, and of course, this environment is also used for development purposes. So we are already running at 2.6.0. That's why one of the things I just had with one of the menus was a bit different than I was used to. I always run into little surprises like that, and that's how I learn. Pretty funny normally, so no problem. But then if we have a new release, it will sit on top. That's the only one you would need to deploy. It's incremental in that way, so easy to keep up, and will take 5, 6, 7 minutes to deploy, depending on the release size, of course. But that's let's say between 5 and 10 minutes. All right, let's hop over to the presentation again, because I'd like to talk a bit about Manager for WV for just a couple of minutes. So this has been launched on October 21st, I believe, and I'd like to share with you how to get it, which is through the Azure Marketplace. So it's basically an installation of Manager for WVD as you would do when you would like to use it in production as well. So that process is exactly the same. But a big difference is, of course, its purpose. So it's only allowed to be used in private Azure lab environments. So no lab environments of companies, no test environments of companies or trial things or anything like that. So for that, we have other license types and so on and so forth. This is just a personal Azure lab purposes only. So we limit it to 25 users, which should be more than enough. And I think Neil mentioned this as well. And we also thought about, resources. Should we apply a restriction? So let's say they are allowed to deploy 8 vCPUs or 12 or 14, 16. And then perhaps if some of the limitations are reached, we could disable certain functions, which would also apply to the 25 user limit, for example. But we decided to, just unlimited. Of course, you are still responsible for the underlying resources. So if you would like to provision 500 machines, that's totally fine. Just keep an eye on your costs, of course. And feature-wise, and I think Neil mentioned this as well, you get access to all of the paid-for features as well within your Azure private lab. So everything that we have released up till today will be available within your lab environment as well. And of course, that also applies to everything new that's coming out. Now, if you are in Manager for WVD and you are in trial mode, we've added the Community Edition. So what you would normally see is the same thing without the Community Edition. And if you click on Learn More, it will tell you exactly what you need to do to get your Community Edition activated. And then afterwards, your edition will be set to Community, which can take up to a couple of hours. Go to the Azure Marketplace, let us know. There's a KB article, which I'll share at the end of the presentation, of course, as well, but it's easy to find in Google online as well. Just send me an email, drop me a line via Twitter, join the Slack channel, do whatever you like, and I'll make sure that your community edition of Manager for WVD will be enabled, and I'll let you know how and when that's done as well. And that's basically all you need to do. Now, from an architectural point of view, Manager for WVD Community Edition in your lab environment is exactly the same as Manager for WVD, the paid version. So there are a couple of things to be aware of. Like I mentioned at the beginning, the product is built out of various platform as a service services, and those are not for free, of course. So there is a certain charge for those services within your own subscription as well. And also, before you do the installation, we have a couple of prerequisites. Easy to go over. It's pretty basic, or very basic even, but just to be sure that you have a smooth installation of Manager for WVD, the Community Edition. And of course, these prerequisites apply to the normal solution as well. And it's something that we normally would share with customers, clients also before doing the installation. Now, a couple of helpful resources. So the Zendesk page, this is also one of the links I'll share with you guys at the end of the presentation. It has the Quick Start Guide, and the Quick Start Guide has the prerequisites I just mentioned. So as you can see, I'll hop over to the next screen, of course, but this is pretty basic stuff, but it helps just to make sure to have this in place. This is with regards to the underlying resources being deployed. And as you can see near here as well, it's primarily 99% the app service and the SQL database that take up most of the cost of running this solution within your environment, which goes for production purposes as well, of course. And if you do not know how to adjust this, I'll show you that very quickly after this, but you can also join the Slack channel. And within the Slack channel, and this is a link I'll provide you with as well, you'll have Nerdio Manager for WVD Community Edition sub-channel, and of course reports and facts to go over, and just ask questions, help answer other questions, and so on and so forth. Let me hop over to the portal real quick. So if you look for the app service that is deployed as part of Manager for WVD, so just go to your resource group and look for the app service. You'll find Scale Up App Service Plan here, and this is basically the pricing tier that you are currently using. And of course, as you can see, you can select different ones as well, and the pricing will change. Now, it also means that your resources, your compute resources underneath will change a bit, and they will become a bit less. So keep in mind that if you are running an environment with 15, 20, 25 users and are using heavy compute resources and so on and so forth, and a lot of auto scaling, if the user management interface becomes a bit unresponsive, this would be the first place to go. But normally it would be fine up to 50 to even 100 users to set it to B2 or even B1. And I've tried these two as well, so that's perfectly fine. Same applies to the SQL database. Look for the pricing tier, which you can find right here. Click on it, and then you'll see it will be deployed as standard. It always takes a bit of time to come up with the cost calculation. Now you see 30. But if you set it to basic, it will become like 1/6 of the price, and this is more than enough for a lab environment. So just so you know, this is how you can reconfigure your underlying or parts of your underlying services as part of Manager for WVD. But again, if you don't know how, just ask, and we have multiple KB articles digging into these specific subjects as well. So that sort of brings me to the end of the presentation. Like I mentioned, please consider joining our Slack channel as well, and I have a page coming up with multiple of the resources I referenced throughout the presentation as part of the community edition as well. The Nerdio Tech Insider program was launched about 2.5 months ago. We have a meetup page, go and check it out. Please join as well. We have a lot of fun and educational, hopefully, sessions coming up around Manager for WVD, but a lot of other stuff around WVD and just Microsoft technology and Azure in general coming up. This is the resources, or these are the resources, which sort of brings me to the end of the presentation. So if there are any questions in the chat window, perhaps, please let me know, or via Neil, or perhaps I can have a look for myself. And at least, of course, I would like to thank you very much for attending this session. If you have any questions, please reach me at the given email address. Go check out the website, go check out Community Edition. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me, hopefully. All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Bas.
Yes, sure. My pleasure.
Does anyone have any questions for Bas before we move on? Nope. Okay.
And otherwise, I'll pick them out in the chat if they come within now in a couple of minutes or after the session. No problem.
Okay.
Okay, guys. Talk to you later. Bye bye.
Thank you. So, Esther, are you here with us?
Yes, I am.
Good, good, good. So Esther's gonna drop some DevOps automation goodness on you. So, very much thanks to Bas for his presentation. Very informative. So, if you haven't checked out Nerdio before, hopefully you now know a lot more about Nerdio. So yeah, Esther, the room is yours.
Okay, cool. So everyone should be able to see my presentation slides.
Yes, we can.
I was going to say I'll take that as a yes. So the pleasure is all mine to be here with the UK WVD User Group and to share some of the automation fun that I've been having with WVD. And I wanted to make sure that this presentation is more storytelling about how I did my first explorations within Azure and how I got to fully automating host pool deployments. So hopefully I can encourage you to do that as well. So quick introduction of for those of you who do not know me yet. So my name is Esther Barthel. I've been a technical consultant for over 20 years, mostly focused on end user computing and doing various things like designing, implementing, and even troubleshooting different environments. I've been around in the community for quite some years now. Been in the CTP program, been nominated and awarded as an MVP. And I spent some time together with the other two female CTPs to start a Women in Tech mentorship program, not to have some kind of dating show, but to offer a platform where women can have one-on-one mentoring and extend their network, become more visible within the community, and share their experiences and stories with us as well. Last couple of years, I've been mostly focused on DevOps and automation of Windows deployments, Citrix deployments, mostly focused on REST APIs, JSON and PowerShell, and the last year mostly shifting to using DevOps and automation within cloud environments like Azure. Oh. So as I mentioned, I want to focus on WVD and my automation adventures with WVD. So I'll focus and explain ARM templates, Azure automation, and zoom in on Azure DevOps as well. So to just get started and not take up too much of your precious time, Windows Virtual Desktop. I'm pretty sure that most of you already have some experience and some knowledge about Windows Virtual Desktop, so I will not make it an entire introduction of what Windows Virtual Desktop is all about. But what I wanted to make sure is that you realize that this presentation mostly focused on that part of your WVD deployment that is within your subscription and under your control. So we're not going to focus on the components or the infrastructure that is provided and managed by Microsoft. So if I'm talking about what is under your control, I'm mostly focusing on the desktop and remote apps. In Windows Virtual Desktop terms, that means that we'll be focusing on the session host, host pools, and a little bit on applications as well. Those of you who have already deployed POCs or WVD environments know that you need to take some prerequisites into account. So I just summed them up as some basic steps because I myself ran into some troubleshooting experiences where I had to call in help from Freek Bersen, who is my WVD ninja. and great help whenever I get stuck with some WVD challenges. Because one of the things that I didn't realize is that because your session hosts have to be domain joined, they also need to have DNS servers point them to the domain controllers to be able to automatically join them to the domain through a host pool deployment. So this is just basically a strong reminder that you need that VNet in place. You need to have either a domain controller with domain services or an Azure AD domain services to be able to deploy WVD. Of course, AD Connect to make sure that you have your identity synchronized. But the main important thing to realize right now is that the virtual machines cannot be Azure AD joined yet. It is coming, but for now, we can only work with standard or legacy domain joined virtual machines or hybrid AD joined machines. So zooming in on creating a host pool for WVD. So this basically was my first experience in diving into the WVD world. So I quickly discovered create a host pool, or basically clicked on host pools and realized that to get started, I needed to create my first host pool. So eagerly clicking on that link, I was surprised that you basically need to provide quite some information before you actually see Azure creating that host pool. So of course it is standard information, like what is the name you want to give to your host pool. You have to, of course, specify whether it's a pooled or a personal host pool. Load balancing algorithms that you can choose from. If we're zooming in on the virtual machines, which virtual machine size do you want to select? How many virtual machines? What image do you want to have as the basis of your virtual machines? Is it going to be a gallery or shared image gallery, or are you going to create your own custom image? And even zooming down on what I mentioned previously, that VNet configuration that needs to make sure that your session host can reach that domain controller. And of course, the domain information to actually be able to join your session host to a domain. From a WVD architecture, you also need to provide a workspace. Tagging, of course, is for your own benefits to be able to either financially or environmental, technically make differentiations between your resources. So feel free to add whatever tags you need in there. And then finally, we get to that review and validation page. And when validation is passed, meaning that the Azure Resource Manager has made a basic check whether or not it can work with the information you provided, you can finally hit that create button, and then magic will happen. But for me, this felt like a very long and manual process that I definitely didn't feel comfortable with repeating over and over and over with different customers or even for different environments. So I figured there had to be a smarter way to quickly deploy host pools for WVD. So I did some reading, did some checking up, and I realized that the Azure Resource Manager, that is the engine underneath Azure that deploys all the resources and configures all the resources for you, can actually use ARM templates. And those templates are based on JSON payloads and expressions. And if we're zooming in on JSON, just to make sure that we all have the same basic knowledge and to actually make sure that I was writing a syntax correct JSON file, I wanted to go over the quick syntax rules. So they are pretty basic, so do not be scared right away. So all data is registered in name value pairs, separated by commas. We create objects with curly braces and specify arrays within square brackets if we're talking JSON. And of course, to make it more exciting, you can always mix and match all those rules to create actual nesting of your JSON objects and different arrays as well. So going back to ARM templates, the cool part is that Microsoft offers quite some extensive documentation on it. For instance, they offer you this quick template format that explains that there are different sections within your ARM template. So content version is for your own versioning. Parameters are your input parameters. So those are externally, can be externally provided to your template. Variables are used within your template to either concatenate strings or make sure that you have easier references to all the different resources. If you want to use some basic functions, you can define that in the function section. But the most important part of your ARM template is that resources, because this is where you define and configure and specify all the Azure resources that you want to create and deploy within your subscription. And in the output section, you can also specify what output your the Azure Resource Manager returns after deploying your resources based on the template. So far, pretty easy until I reached this page, which is a template for an ARM template. So there's no full resource definition in this template, and don't worry if you cannot read it. This is just to hopefully let you experience some of the hesitation that I felt after seeing this on creating my own ARM templates, because it's all of a sudden it kind of felt overwhelming to get started with this empty canvas and create some cool WVD host pool within Azure. The good news is that, as I mentioned before, Microsoft offers a lot of documentation, and they even have what they call quick start guides that make it very easy for you to feel more comfortable using the different techniques and services within Azure. And even for your ARM template, this quick start guide will definitely give you that quick start. Because basically what the quick start guide says is to go to your Azure portal, to hit that create a resource button, to select the resource that you want to deploy within the marketplace, and to fill out all the information in the different forms that are presented. And I'm pretty sure that this screen will still look familiar to you. But instead of hitting that create button after the validation is passed, they advise you to hit that download a template for automation link at the bottom of the page, because that will provide you with a download page for an ARM template and an ARM template parameters file. And if we zoom in on that downloaded template, you'll notice that it has actually filled out all the different sections within the ARM templates. So all parameters are already specified. All the variables that are being used to quickly zoom in on different resources, like your VNet, like your host pool name, to work out your template, that is already provisioned. All the resources and all their definitions and configurations are already in this template file, even including the output that will return the virtual machine objects that are created. And in case you still feel the need to customize or tweak or maybe even better understand the ARM template, there's also a quick, not a quick, a very extensive reference guide available in the documentations. And this allows you to zoom in on each and every resource available within Azure and get the right JSON format to add to your template, or even provide or zoom in on the different properties that you can specify. For instance, in this case, it's the virtual network, zooming in on DHCP options, and then realizing that I can actually specify the DNS servers even within my ARM template. So I can quickly add that information to my ARM template and make sure that that prerequisite is set in my template and will be there before all the resources are created. Another cool resource is that there is quite an extensive library available with almost 900 templates that are already pre-created either by the community or by the third-party vendors that offer services through Azure. So feel free to search the library and see if it already has some pre-configured ARM templates for the resources that you want to deploy. Or if we're talking about WVD specific, there's also a GitHub repository that is focused on the WVD or RDS templates. So I was pretty happy that I now found a quick way to get started with ARM templates. And I was all excited to start my test drive with the ARM template that I downloaded. Hang on, just moving that out of the way. So getting back to the templates, I wanted to use my template, and I realized that there is an Azure service available called Templates that not only provides a template library for you, but it also offers the option to deploy your Azure resources right from the selected template. So all you have to do is select your template, and instead of edit, changing that template, you hit that deploy button, and you can actually start with the deployment of your template. So what you see here is now that all I have to do is basically fill out some of those parameters, because the template will definitely show all the input parameters that are available. And in my case, I did adjust my ARM template just a little bit by adding already default values to that template. So a lot of these text boxes and parameters are already filled out with the default values from my template. And that makes it easier to deploy this template, because all I have to do right now is fill out that administrator account password, because I didn't want that in clear text in my template. Scroll down to the bottom and hit that agree to the terms and conditions, and hit purchase to get the deployment started. So just quickly showing you how it works. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of information and parameters already pre-configured with default values. I only have to hit that administrator account password or fill that out, and then scroll all the way down to the bottom. So there are a lot of parameters that you have to go through, but you already saw that within the first tabs when we did the manual exercise. So now my deployment is in progress, and I can easily follow and track the progress itself. So what this template also does is use this new technique called linked templates that allow you to basically have a more modular configuration of your ARM template. In this case, I'm using, it's a linked template to create a virtual machine within Azure to join that virtual machine to a domain. And you'll quickly learn within this presentation that I do love to get some visual confirmation while I'm testing all these different things. So you'll probably see me switch back and forth between the different screens to double check, in this case, whether or not my session host was actually joined to the domain. Going back to the deployment, so after the machine is joined to the domain, another thing called DSC extension is started, which basically installs your WVD agent on the machine. Going back to the top level of my ARM template deployment, it should now say that the deployment is successful. And that basically means that I have now deployed a WVD host pool based on my ARM template with my pre-configured default values. As I said, some additional visual confirmation. So I'm zooming in on the host pool that I just created and making sure that it did indeed create one session host as well. So this already felt like a small victory or one small step for man. But I wanted to go to that giant leap for mankind. So I wanted to find a way to automatically start and to reuse that template with different input parameters. So the good news is that for my favorite scripting language, PowerShell, there is an actual Azure module. And this can easily be installed from the PowerShell gallery by using the install module commandlet. And that will give you some awesome commandlets to work with. And basically the AZ module is a placeholder for a lot of, well, what I call sub-modules. So for all the different services within Azure, you have separate mini modules focused on those services, like the az.compute and the az.desktop virtualization for WVD. So this means that I can now easily use PowerShell commands to, or commandlets to configure and create resources within Azure. And I can definitely do that by knowing how to use PowerShell to connect to Azure. The quick start guide to do that talks about using the login -az account commandlet. But this commandlet basically performs an interactive login. So it either shows a pop-up screen asking for your credentials, or it will give you a link that you will need to click on in order to provide your credentials. And that definitely is not the way I wanted to go building my script, that I wanted to have interactive less as possible. So in order to work with automation and to script against Azure or use the Azure APIs more directly, you can use what Azure calls a service principal. And this is an application registration within Azure AD that you can assign specific rights and roles to, so that you can have some roles and rights to perform actions within Azure. So the app registration, you add an app, hang on, let me go back. So you add a new registration to, in the app registration screen of Azure Active Directory. Oh, wow, tongue twisters. And by doing that, you are presented with an application ID. And you need to make sure that you store that in a secure place. together with your directory or tenant ID, because those two pieces of information are required to use your service principal. And you need one more additional piece of information, because you do need to authenticate, which means that you need to provide not just your application ID, but also an application secret. And you can quickly create your own client secret, but you have to be aware that you need to copy and paste and store that in a secure way as well. So now that we have all the information and all the prerequisites in place, I can now easily use that application ID and application secret to create my PowerShell credential, and the tenant ID together with the connect AZ account commandlet to log on to Azure with a service principal. And there's no interaction or pop-ups happening when I'm using this method. It just instantly creates my session and lets me know that I can get started with additional commands. To deploy or use an ARM template to deploy resources in Azure, you can use the new AZ Resource Group Deployment commandlet. And this basically allows you to use that ARM template file and an ARM template parameter file, if needed, to actually deploy those same specified resources in the template file to Azure. And basically what it does is that this PowerShell commandlet interacts directly with the Azure Resource Manager. And it's kicking off the same process as I was doing by clicking on that deploy button of my template in the templates services of the Azure portal. And the cool part is that the commandlet also makes sure that it returns a provisioning state. So you can easily track whether or not that deployment was successful, because as you saw in the previous demo, it does take a little time before a host pool is deployed to WVD. And it will also show you all the input parameters that were provided. So going back to my script, I was really excited that I now have a more automated way, or even scheduled way, to start deploying WVD host pools. And I can even tweak a little with the parameters file, or even use a parameters object with the new AZ Resource Group Deployment commandlet to make it more dynamic, or to reuse my my ARM template by replacing those default parameter values. But it kind of still felt like I was using a management machine to either connect through the internet or to have a connection to the Azure environment, and then kick off the deployment. So if I wanted to perform additional actions on a session host after the deployment, that means that I would have to make sure that that session host would be available through an internet connection, or at least from the management system that I was using. So I wanted to find a way that would allow me to stay within my Azure environment, but still provide an automated way for my ARM deployments. And one of those things that I first discovered was Azure Automation. And the reason why I got so excited about Azure Automation is that it allows me to use PowerShell runbooks. So once again, my favorite scripting language could be easily ported to an Azure service. And Azure Automation not only offers the option to run PowerShell-based runbooks, it also gives you a quick or more centralized way to manage all the Azure or all the PowerShell modules that need to be in place on the system that is running that runbook. So this made sure that I did not have to include any checks for the existing or whether or not modules were existing, whether or not I needed to install modules, and whether or not I needed to import different modules. Excuse me. So this way I could easily set up all the required modules and even keep track of the different versions of the modules that are being used. The other cool part is that it offers a way to store credentials and variables in a secure manner. For those of you who paid attention to the first script that I showed, you might have noticed, and I quickly moved away from that, is that I was using a comma-separated file, which meant that even my app secret was non-encryptedly stored on my machine. So that's not the way I wanted to go forward to production environments. So Azure Automation allows me to simply create and manage my credentials in a centralized way, but still refer to them and use the actual values within my runbooks. So going back to my runbook, basically I could port the same PowerShell script that I was using and developing previously directly into Azure Automation as a runbook and just hit start. But I wanted to make some minor adjustments in this case. So as you can see, if you hit start with the runbook, it now asks you for 2 input parameters. These are not the parameters that are specified within my ARM template, but these are parameters that are specified in my PowerShell script. And I'll get back to that in a minute. And the other thing that you need to specify is your run settings. So where do you want this runbook to run? Do you want to run it on Azure and basically use a serverless deployment where you are not in control, but you're basically using an agent that runs in Azure? Or if you want to have more control over the agent that is running your scripts, you can select a hybrid worker, which is a machine that you control and that you specifically assigned to Azure Automation to be used for runbook deployments. So zooming in on the runbook, as I mentioned, I specified 2 parameters because I wanted to make it a bit more dynamic and reusable for future purposes. The other adjustment that I made was to get rid of that comma-separated file and to actually use the automation variables and credentials. The other thing that the script does is it just, as mentioned before, it uses that connect AZ account commandlet to log on to Azure and have my session ready. Only this time it's using the credentials that I previously retrieved from Azure Automation credentials. And of course, the part where I deploy my resources based on that ARM template with the new AZ resource group deployment commandlet. So this is all pretty straightforward. And the only thing that I also changed within this presentation, because I didn't want to start basically the same demo, is that I replaced my ARM template with a new one that does not create a new host pool, but actually adds a session host or multiple VMs to an existing host pool. So this is just to show you that I'm reusing that previously created host pool with 1 session host, and I will add an additional session host to it with my runbook. So once again, starting the runbook, providing the input parameters for that runbook, selecting to run it on Azure, and then hitting OK. And you can see that the status of the runbook first is queued, and then once it is picked up by an agent, it will change from starting to running. once it is running, you can actually keep track of the output of your PowerShell script by clicking on the output tab. And you do have to refresh it every now and then because there's no auto refresh function on the output. It showed me that the deployment was already in place. So once again, I'm switching back to my Azure portal to check if that deployment actually started. And I know we've already seen this, but what you can see is that it's now deploying a new session host, going through the same motions, adding, joining it to the domain, running that DSC extension on it. And then it should quickly tell us that the deployment was successful. So going back to Azure Automation, going back to my runbook, you'll also notice that if I select the runbook, it actually gives me an overview of all the jobs that were run and were completed successful. If I now refresh the output again, it shows the same results as it did with the PowerShell that I previously run. It says provisioning state succeeded, shows me all the input parameters. And if we scroll down, it even shows the output that is specified within the ARM template. In this case, the name of the created session host. You can also keep track of any errors, warnings, or even all logged messages for your runbook by simply selecting those tabs. So finally it felt, oh yeah, this is of course another visual confirmation to make sure that there are indeed now 2 session hosts added to that host pool or active in that host pool. So as I mentioned before, basically Azure Automation finally felt like I found a way to fully automate and maybe even collaborate with the other team members to have some real WVD fun in configuring and maybe even creating additional scripts for administrative tasks. But I also know that there's another DevOps tool that is very popular to use. And I do not want this presentation to start a discussion on Azure Automation versus Azure DevOps, but I did wanted to show you that there are different ways to reach that automation goal, and to encourage you to use the tooling that you feel most comfortable with, or that is the de facto standard within your organization. Because I still believe that with the help of having that direct API interaction available, that you can use almost every tool that you want to automate your Azure resources. So zooming in on Azure DevOps, I cannot just zoom in on Azure DevOps without mentioning the fact that Microsoft provides a WVD Quick Start. And that basically sets up, if you have an empty subscription, that sets up your entire Azure environment with a WVD POC containing session hosts that have FSLogix, Office 365, Teams pre-installed. But also pre-configures your Azure DevOps pipeline so you can easily get started and get familiar with your CI/CD pipelines and environments. So as I mentioned, it zooms in on all the different components that are nowadays becoming a de facto standard for cloud deployments. But I wanted to basically understand what I was doing and not piggyback on what Microsoft already did. And my subscription wasn't as empty as I was hoping it to be. So the other cool thing is that Tom Hickling, our WVD Global Black Belt, wrote this cool blog post on how to use Azure DevOps for WVD deployments or infrastructure as code. And the reason why I'm saying cool blog post is because Tom also comes from an infrastructure background, so he's using some terminology that is more familiar to me than the developer's terminology that can go all then can get all excited about versioning and sourcing, where my versioning still relies on adding dates to my file names in some cases. So back to Azure DevOps and deploying an ARM template through Azure DevOps. So I'm not going to zoom in on all the coolness that Tom describes in his blog post, because he's really using the pipelines and releases all combined. I just wanted to have a quick way and a quick demo to show you the capabilities of Azure DevOps. So I'm only looking at a release pipeline in this case. So the cool part is that you can override template parameters from that action that you're performing through DevOps. And as you can see, I've used the override template parameters and added some variables in there. And the reason why I'm doing that is that Azure DevOps allows you to use pipeline variables, and they even come in 2 different flavors, so to speak. So the first variable type is just a variables group within your Azure DevOps library. So that's basically a locally used variables group, but you can also link it to an Azure key vault and use a centralized management system or secrets vault within Azure DevOps. So going back to my release, just to speed up a little bit and to get started with the demo, this is another way of adding that virtual machine to an existing host pool that I showed previously with Azure Automation. So I'm taking a little bit of time to type in a description so I can have a sip of water. Once you hit create, the release is actually already being queued in the system. So zooming in on the log files, I can actually track the progress of the deployment. As you see, it's now changed from queue to in progress, similar as with Azure Automation. And we can actually zoom in on the progress of the template deployment. And this is pretty much similar steps as we saw before, because I'm addressing every time the same API service within Azure. So the cool part is that the deployment name is shown. So this makes it easier for my visual confirmation to actually find that deployment. And once again, double check if the deployment is actually started and in progress. So this calms my nerves again, so I can go back to the status and the logs of my release pipeline. Zooming or fast forwarding, because I didn't want to waste 8 minutes of your time. So, and now it actually succeeded. And the cool part also of Azure DevOps is that you can always go back to the logs and actually see all the feedback that you're getting from the actions that you perform. In this case, it says that the deployment was successful for my template. This is the kind of stuff that I would like, that I love to dive into even more, because I have to admit, I still feel like a DevOps noob, but I wanted to at least show you some of the capabilities and possibilities to build some cool automated workflows for WVD. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you is that, of course, even though it feels like I made that giant leap for mankind, there's always new challenges. One of the things that I ran into with PowerShell and the PowerShell modules is that if there is a bug within the PowerShell modules, in my case, there was a bug in the AZ module in regards to using secure strings that was broken, and that's why I kind of switched back for this demo to parameters file. So in order to make sure that I'm not dependent on any PowerShell module versions or updates that need to take place, or dependencies between modules even, I wanted to switch back or change my scripts to use native REST API calls to Azure instead of using that PowerShell module. So I'm rewriting a lot of my scripts that I created, and hopefully I'll have them finished before the end of year, and will be able to share them with the community. The other cool thing that I think is something that we really need to invest in, because this is the one part that is in our control, and that's the image that is being used for our session hosts. So I really want to dive into Azure Image Builder and the shared image gallery to incorporate those techniques and automation within my full workflow for WVD. And I know Neil already presented some cool stuff on Project Bicep, but as you've seen in this demo, ARM templates are not the easiest templates and JSON formatting to quickly pick up and deploy. And I know Project Bicep will make it so much easier to quickly get started with ARM templates and deployments, that I think it's worth your time to invest in that as well. And hopefully I'll be able to share some of my experience with you in the future. So one more thing before I give controls back to Neil. I love sharing with the community. So one of the things that I really want to be able to give back to the community is what I like to call the starter Git for WVD automation. So I created a GitHub repository. It's not having a lot of content right now, but I want to make sure that it contains all the scripts that I created within these demos. It will contain the ARM templates that I've been using, so you can quickly reuse that, create your own demo environments and play around with it, and maybe even give me some feedback on how I can improve my scripting as well. So if there are any questions, then I guess thanks for sharing the link, Neil. So I'll double check the chat, but as far as I've seen, there's been some praises, but not a lot of questions so far.
Nope. Thanks so much for that, Esther. That was an awesome session. As your
You're very welcome.
Always are. Yeah, so if anyone's got any questions, just pop them in the chat window, or you can reach out to myself or Kirk afterwards, or Esther, and she'll be happy to help you.
Definitely.
Good. Awesome. Because everyone's brain's frazzled, it's getting late, so we've decided to abandon the Kahoot quiz, so you can get back to your fireworks and your families and stuff like that. So we've got a question, Esther, from
Phil. I
Phil.
was just gonna ask or answer it in the chat, but no, unfortunately my scripts currently are only focused on the spring release or the new WVD, and it's not focused on WVD Classic, but I can provide you with some links to other GitHub repositories that have some solutions for that.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so yeah, it's been good sessions tonight. If you have any ideas or any wants or needs for next month's user group meeting, please let myself or Kirk know. As I say, we do this for you. We don't do it for ourselves. So if you want to see any specific comment, any specific content, just reach out to us and we'll try to do the best that we can. So is anybody else having any other questions or anything you want to talk about before we leave? No? Okay, good. Well, thanks for everyone coming. Thanks to all the presenters. It's been a great evening, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you next month. All these sessions are recorded, so I'll post a link to the meetup group after I finish processing it, and then you can rewatch anything that you need later. So, okay,
Thanks,
I'm gonna
everyone.
end it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good night, all.
Great session, Neil.